Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Jonathan McGeer. I am a software engineer at Garmin.
My name is James Stevie. I'm one of the Internet Architects here at Garmin. And Internet Architect is a really made-up title. It really just means I'm a software architect, so let's go there.
Doesn't mean you designed the Internet.
I did not design the Internet. Al Gore and I are not friends, but we might be close. You never know.
There you go. Yeah. Cool. I want to say thank you to Pivotal for hosting tonight. The food was provided by them, so they're good folks, good people to get to know. And we also would like to let you know if you're interested in coming to Cloud Foundry Summit, it is from June 12th to June 15th in San Jose, actually Santa Clara, California. If you check the meetup page, there's a 10% discount code. I think Brian might also have 20% discount codes if you want to go there as well. So yeah. For those of you who don't know who Garmin is, we are just a little GPS company. We were founded about 20 years ago. Our revenues this year, I think, are slated to be around $3 billion. And some really cool news, we are number 46 on Forbes' best employees list. We're number 2 in Kansas. So if you're looking for somewhere to be, we're a great place. Come find us.
What?
Yeah. I think that's probably a good enough intro on Garmin for this group. What's that?
There, you did your job on Garmin.
That's right. That's right. That's right. All right, a little history on our cloud native journey. So we started, our introduction to Cloud Foundry was in about 2013. We used Pivotal Web Services to kind of play around and see what Cloud Foundry is all about. Tried some maybe deployments and things like that. Got pretty fired up. We started our first foundation in 2015. We'll talk more about that later. Up until that point, we were all manual deployments. We didn't have pipelines. Our development culture was done meant it's either in code review or the code review is finished and we're just waiting for someone to deploy it. All of our production was on VMs. We were very non-automated.
I think done meant we passed it over to the wall to QA.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. And they would tell me if it was working or not. So that was done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was a bad time for the business because they waited sometimes 60 to 90 days for code to drop. All right, a little more on our journey. We have been through, I'm going to say 2 pivotal dojos, really 1, but kind of 2. I'll get into that in a minute. We are actively working on automation. Our production, we've got a lot of applications already in Cloud Foundry. We're moving toward being cloud native in everything we do. A little later, we'll talk about where we are now, and we'll talk about Garmin Labs. So, fast forward to February 2015 from our first introduction in 2013. I will call this Dojo Lite. So, we decided that we needed to have a Cloud Foundry up and running very quickly. At that time, our current pivotal rep, his name was Tony Aiken. Some of the folks in the room know him. Realized that we were in for a world of hurt, and he kind of Wild West rounded up a band of gunslingers and brought them in here and helped us to get our first Cloud Foundry up and running. The reason I put this slide up is there's actually meaning to the picture here. I don't know if you remember this, but this is the scene where Neo wakes up and he goes, "I know Kung Fu," and then he proceeds to have his ass kicked. That was kind of what happened with us. And the reason is that we have something called the Garmin Way. It's worked really well for things like developing airplane GPSs and watches and all kinds of things. But when it comes to really big things like Cloud Foundry, it's a really bad idea when someone tells you, this is how you should do this process, you should walk this way, and Garmin goes, well, we will, except for this little piece right here, we know how to do this better. No, we don't. So that was kind of how that first experience went. It was a great platform to walk forward on. It really, excuse me, it really helped us learn a lot, but we learned quickly we didn't have a production-grade Cloud Foundry. So fast forward a little more, and this time we went for real. We had an actual Pivotal Dojo. We went to Pivotal Labs in Chicago, and that's where we started things off. And we built a production-grade Cloud Foundry. We used all the best practices that Pivotal brought to the table. We debated things, but pretty much we went with what Pivotal recommended from that. That is our current, one of our current production foundations. We now have, I think, 2 production ones and 1 non-production one. At the end of this, we had 4 apps that had been through our dojo class. We set up a real small lab-like environment where we had pair stations set up. One of the apps actually took production traffic for part of a day within that first lab.
Yeah, but 10% traffic. It wasn't like the whole load.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your timing on that, like from start to finish?
The dojo lasted 8 weeks. The first 4 we spent standing up the platform. We did a little bit of development around pipelines and things like that, and then we began to bring groups into the lab with us.
And then the key for that was that each one of those teams was only in there for like a week, right?
Yeah.
And the whole goal was to get something running in production before the end of the week.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say teams, what were those skill sets? Devs?
Yeah, we brought mostly devs in. I think we had a couple of ops folks that sort of lived with us while we were doing it. But there again, Pivotal's recommendation is that you take one app and you spend 8 weeks or 6 weeks with one app and re-platform that way. So there again, we weren't quite following the Pivotal Labs model, but the goal was to expose some different people and some different applications to Cloud Foundry to see what was possible. So it was successful, even though I think we didn't get apps that were running in production at the end of the time. We made really large leaps forward in a really short amount of time.
And we're talking about apps that really weren't cloud native, were monolithic in nature, a lot of them, right? Mm-hmm. So we were not only addressing getting them in Cloud Foundry, we were having to figure out how to take that app that was certainly not cloud native and figure out how to, turn it into this tool that really required it to be cloud native.
Yep. Yeah. Ready for automation?
Yep.
All right.
So obviously, we learned quickly that you can't do Cloud Foundry without automation. I mean, some people would argue you could probably do it manually for a while, but to get what we needed from a scale perspective and to get what we wanted from a speed to market perspective, you have to do automation. So initial automation that they did in the lab was linking Jenkins jobs together, and it was not even using the Jenkins pipeline plugin. It was really this job when it finishes causes this job when it finishes, and it was kind of a mess. And so it worked for the lab, it was great, but it was difficult to set up, and when you wanted to bring in a new project, somebody had to do the Jenkins foo to get it to work. And obviously, there aren't that many of us who are Jenkins foo experts, and so we decided we probably should look at something else. Actually, I decided we needed to look at something else because that's my space, my call.
Yeah.
So
in the defense,
I started. What?
I just wanted to say, in the defense of that first pipeline, I would never want to go back to it now, knowing what I know. But it was from moving from, hey, Mr. Production Management guy, would you deploy this for me, to I'm going to press this button. It was huge.
I would say it was a good learning experience.
Yes.
And that's kind of one of the things that I would say has been part of our journey, is that we learn a lot every time we fail. And I think that's key. And that's kind of part of our whole continuous delivery model anyway, is to learn from your failures and don't repeat them. So when I saw their pipeline and what they were using, I'm like, that's not going to work. First of all, it doesn't meet any of the continuous delivery guidelines. It wasn't in version control. It wasn't code from my perspective. It really required manual effort to get the projects up and running. So I looked at Jenkins pipeline plugin, but I also looked at Concourse CI, which is Pivotal's automated build tool. At that time when I was looking at it, Concourse was relatively new, and it required installation in Bosch at the time. And I just didn't want to go down that path at that point in time. It would have required me to get somebody from the sysadmin team involved, and I could install Jenkins myself on a VM and go off and running. So essentially, my decision was, let's go with Jenkins. I had familiarity with it. The developers had familiarity with it. We had existing installations that we could use, so we went down the Jenkins path. So Jenkins has pipelines as code. Everything's in version control. I essentially take and point the project to the Git repo. It finds the Jenkins file, and my pipeline executes. So I can actually automate that. I haven't yet, but I can automate that. I can actually tell Jenkins, go scan the repo and find all the Jenkins file projects and just automatically build them. We aren't there yet, but that's certainly where I can go. So it met my need to be in version control. It got rid of manual work, and essentially got us a lot further down the road than where we were. The only problem is that we were in what I would call the pipeline wild west. We didn't have any standards for the pipeline. We were repeating code in every single project. So we had our Jenkins file pipeline was probably, I think the biggest one's over 2,000 lines long, and had a whole bunch of functions defined in it, and then so they copy that file from this project to this project to this project, and pretty soon I've got, well, now I need to make a change. Well, now I got to change it in 5 different places or 10 different places, and so everybody was doing the same thing. Everybody was doing it different ways. It's not going to work. Violates dry. So we instituted what I would affectionately call a global library, and so now the main Jenkins file right now is probably 90 lines long. If I spend a little more time on it, I can make it a function call, and nobody would have to have essentially their pipeline would be one call, and it would be done. I'm not there yet, but I can get there.
And one thing I want to highlight there, this is from May of 2016 until, what are we now? May of 2017, and we're probably, I don't know, a few months into that last pipeline. So in 8 months, we went from Jenkins pipelines version 1 to version 2 to version 3.
Yeah, I'd say we're probably on version 3.5.7.
Yeah.
Because it's all in my court, and
Yeah.
I don't have time to work on it because I'm working on everything else.
So what are you guys using for the development environment?
From like IDE, most of the developers are using Eclipse because it's free and open source. If you want to, there are some developers using IntelliJ, but they have to pay for that themselves. So.
Yep. Sometimes I just use Atom or Visual Studio Code. I just go to Spring Initializer, grab a project from there, and that's where I start when I want to just get something going. So at times I don't even bother opening Eclipse anymore.
So, but most of them are using
Yeah.
Eclipse.
Yeah, any heavy development for sure.
Actually, most of them are using STS, but not, just an Eclipse version. So obviously, automation doesn't do you any good if you don't have feedback, and this is something we still need to work on. We're not really doing a very good job of automated acceptance testing. Actually, as of right now, I don't think I have a single pipeline that's doing anything other than automated unit testing. I don't have any pipeline that's doing an automated acceptance test that says, yes, we're good to go and move forward. So what happens is we get to that point in the pipeline, and then I have to have a manual step in place that says, stop, wait, and then somebody clicks the button to move us a little bit further forward. But at least it's a button push and not waiting on somebody else to do something. The developer can actually go in and click the button themselves and move the project forward. So the developer is totally in control. Obviously, I would much prefer to have an automated acceptance test, an automated smoke test, lots of other automated there, but our automation journey is iterative, and we'll get there eventually, but we're not there yet. One of the big things that we're missing that we just haven't figured out how to do yet, we do security analysis on all of our code. Static analysis we run, but it takes days to run a static analysis on an application. So I can't make my pipeline wait for a static analysis because that would not be acceptable to the business to wait for that feature for days. So I need to we're looking for something to do some real-time security analysis to find those bugs prior to going live with them. We'll have that at some point. Whether the vendor we're currently working with for a static analysis will provide that or not is kind of up in the air. Veracode, where you're sending it off to them, they run a static analysis on it and gives us back a report that tells us all the vulnerabilities in the code, including libraries and dependencies. So we can either upgrade the dependencies or fix the problems. It's funny because it even finds vulnerabilities in code that you're not actually, even if it's just in the library. Like we have some really bad old libraries that got really, really old, yucky code in them that probably shouldn't be included in new functionality that, it's doing an SVN merge. That's kind of a bad thing, So. What's that?
Check marks.
Check marks?
Which we kick off with our Jenkins builds.
Cool.
We have our first live run of it being off production till next week, so hopefully it doesn't break anything. So.
Keep your fingers crossed.
Yes. But we're running in audit mode for a while, to where it won't actually stop the build.
Yeah.
Just give us reports.
Cool.
We're using AppScan.
Yep. Heard of it.
Way too many false positives for us that we had to abandon that and start looking for other tools.
Cool. And then for me, automation is about failing fast. So I want it to be automated so that it can fail quicker and get my developers' feedback faster so that they can fix it and move on. We're trying to change development culture here at Garmin a little bit too, in that the developer can no longer say, hey, it's not my problem, it's QA's problem. I'm sorry, you own the code all the way to production. You make sure it's working all the way to production. And that's kind of a culture change that we're trying to institute at Garmin. So automation is just one of the ways we're working on that. I think you're up next.
Yep. So far we've got a lot of applications in production, and I want to highlight a couple of them here. On your right, that is our current product page for our e-commerce application. That is a Cloud Foundry application backed by a bunch of Cloud Foundry microservices. So that is taking all of our production shopping traffic right now. And in the bottom left, you see our support center. For certain locales, UK and US included, that is your production, or that is your Garmin support experience. So if you have a problem with your watch or your bike computer or anything like that, that's where you're going to go.
And the cool thing about support centers, we started that in did we start that in August? We started in August. We were live in production by November, but we were actually live in production well before that with features that just weren't publicly exposed. And so we were deploying to production within probably a week after starting to code. And we went live with that in November with no problems, no issues. One of the director that was in charge of that application, actually the day before we were going to go live, he found something he didn't like. He sat down with the developer. They fixed it, pushed it. It was live within minutes. So essentially we got a convert in the business that says, yeah, this is the way to go because Cloud Foundry gives me my features now, not tomorrow. So it was a good experience for all of us.
How long would that have taken?
Weeks.
Because you said it like it was just.
It was literally instantaneous almost. I mean, that's.
Otherwise, it would have taken days waiting on people because the process, somebody has to QA, somebody has to take that to test the stage, things like that. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to where Garmin was before, right? We were probably doing releases once a month, maybe. And we had the guy who he's too bad he's not in the room because I like to tease him about it. His name's Bob, but Bob was the builder. And when it came time to release code, you didn't build it yourself. You put it into the repo and you created a ticket for Bob so that Bob could build the artifact. Okay, well, hello. We are now to the point where everything's automated. I click a button, it builds, it deploys, and I'm in dev or test or production. I mean, that's a long way from waiting for a ticket to get resolved. And then if the build broke, God forbid back then, Bob didn't know what to do. Bob was just the builder. Bob didn't know how to fix anything, right? He does have a yellow hat, by the way. Bob the builder hat. Bob has moved on to other jobs. Bob does not do that job anymore.
Yeah, that's actually one of the really cool things about Garmin is there's another place where we're going to talk about some repurposing. But Garmin doesn't get rid of people. They just find new things for them to do. Or they help them find new things they want to do, which is even better. The last application I want to touch on here is, in detail, is our single sign-on application. So this application powers all the login for Garmin Connect, Buy, Fly, the old My Garmin. Some of you may or may not have used that with older products. But if you have a Garmin account and you log into any Garmin system anywhere, this is the application that will serve you. The only reason that team is still doing any work on VMs is because they have to be in China, and we don't have a Cloud Foundry in China yet. So this application is 100% Cloud Foundry, and it is taking an awful lot of load. Every time you log in, obviously the app you're going to interact with the app. But on the back side, every time you interact with a page on Connect or Buy or anything else, the back-end server calls SSO to say, hey, I have a token. Is this still good? And if not, it'll kick you out of the login. So it's not just login. It's every single interaction you have, this application gets hit, and Cloud Foundry is supporting that with ease.
And probably the biggest success story there is that we have, obviously, like most corporations, we're trying to reduce cost and and lower our footprint. That was running on how many VMs probably?
I think they maxed at 12, I think, in
12
Olathe.
VMs. Cloud Foundry with 2 app instances can take that whole load, no problem. So we can essentially get rid of 20 VMs, and we
Right.
will once we stand up Cloud Foundry in China.
Yep.
And this was a monolith application. It's a legacy application, not necessarily a cloud native app.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It was not cloud native. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rob.
So it sounds like you're pretty confident that it's taking it with ease. What are you using to monitor it? And like how do you guys know that it's taking it with ease?
We do have app D.
Okay.
We actually, for this application, I don't think they've even got it enabled. All the logs are flowing through something we call the log delivery pipeline. So the logs from Cloud Foundry all flow into Kafka, and from Kafka they split to Splunk and Elk. We're slowly moving ourselves off of Splunk for cost reasons and moving toward Elk. We've got a lot of dashboards built in both places. So
Well, plus, Rob, we find out really quickly if it's not handling the load because Connect screams really fast. So.
We have particularly monitor those response time and the success rates. And even a small way we would know that.
Okay.
yeah, so there is some alerting hooked up to Splunk right now, and we were also using ElastAlert, so we're moving in that direction to alert on what's happening in Elk. So while we're not necessarily hitting it with AppD, we are watching it pretty closely. But anytime I've pulled up the Cloud Foundry Apps console to look at it, it's running 2 instances, and they're not using all their memory, and they're usually in the 10 to 20% CPU range. And I haven't seen the auto scale notification hit on this app to say that it's gone from 2 instances to 3, I think, in months.
Yeah, actually, most of the time when we see the autoscaler come into play on any of our apps, it's because they have memory leaks that the coders failed to realize they had a memory leak. So it hasn't really been because of load in
Right.
most cases. Most of the time our scalers are coming up because we're running out of memory stupidly, right? Because we're not coding properly. But that's... Huh?
Yeah.
But my
Get
app's
your apps
up. Exactly.
Yeah.
And, which kind of is a good and a bad thing, right? My app stays up, but it hides a problem from my developers. Look, my app's running. Well, yeah, but you keep running out of memory, so fix it. So
Yeah, that's-
another developer culture. It's no longer an emergency.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's probably one thing we didn't have in the deck, but we have a couple of apps that crash every once in a while or on a fairly recent or a fairly predictable basis. But like you said, the developers have no idea, and Cloud Foundry can protect you from certain code issues that you have. So monitoring is really important to know when your apps are crashing, because it might be one of those things where you need to go talk to your developers and get your app fixed. But when your app is running in Cloud Foundry, it's not an issue. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not a Sunday problem, it's a Monday
Who
problem.
works Sunday? Kidding. He does, not me. Are you ready?
Yeah, I think I'm ready. Yeah.
So we're a Splunk shop also, and we've read some reports that the Shore connect Cloud Foundry directly to Splunk. Is that why you put Kafka in the middle?
We did it because we actually started the process before Cloud Foundry was a thing. We had Splunk on a bunch of servers. We had Elk on servers, so we were running, I think we tried the Logstash forwarder, we ended up with Beats, and then you've got the Splunk forwarder. So what you're doing is every server that you have, you're putting extra load on that server every time you want to deliver logs to a new place. And eventually you have so many things like, hey, where do I listen for this? Well, I don't know. So the goal with Kafka was not only do we have logs in multiple different places, but we have this amazing stream of information that's not just logs, it's scaling, it's the app started, traffic, all that stuff is all there. And so anything you need, you just hook up to the right Kafka queue, and if you want to hit it in Splunk, great. If you want to hit it in Kafka, great. If you want, or in Elk, you can do that. But if you have some business need, you just hook up to the right Kafka queue, and you're just another consumer of the platform. Your app has no more load, has no clue anything else is going on.
I'm surprised you said that it's hard to connect to Splunk, because that's, my experience is, that's pretty easy to do. I mean, the direct connectivity here is the Splunk cost.
Yes.
We don't have a chart of the Splunk cost.
Okay.
We haven't accepted the
Yeah, so where do you get that information?
I'll forward you guys an email.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we can talk about that offline at the end of the presentation too, if you want, because we did have Cloud Foundry hooked directly to Splunk at some point as well.
So I've heard in the past, because Cloud Foundry logging did UDP, sometimes that would cause issues, but they've switched over to supporting gRPC, and that just screams like you can't push it over if you try, sort of thing. So that might have been one of the issues that used to happen with Logicator, which is used for all that. But I haven't heard that. I'm not super involved, but I hear that you really can't touch it now.
To go back to those two applications, you talk about the applications crash. So Cloud Foundry restarted the application.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
How often do you monitor that? When you find out after an app crash, how long does it take you guys to find out that? Are you constantly monitoring that? You find out the next day?
Usually next day. I mean, you might say the platform has given us a lot of confidence, and so we don't monitor that terribly closely. And one rule we set for ourselves is that in production, you always run 2 instances of any application. Even small ones, like we've got some marketing apps that are straight HTML, they're completely static. We still give them 2 instances in production for that very reason, that the chances of 2 of them falling over at the same time are really, really low, obviously much lower than 1. So if they crash, they're not going to crash at the same time. So one falls over, the other takes a load, the first one stands back up, and then you're back to 2.
So what's your reaction when you see those apps crash? What do you guys, obviously the apps restarted, the VM restarted, or the instance started. What's your reaction to that? Just monitor to log, see what happens after that?
Usually we tell the developers what happened, and then we ask them to reproduce it and fix the problem. So they're usually able to do that.
Usually tools like Dynamics can give us a good indication why it might have failed. So if it's a need more memory, we add more.
Yeah.
So we need more instances.
So it's working. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. It's really good.
So are you using App Dynamics with Cloud Foundry? Because I know it has.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
Works pretty well.
Yeah. So, this presentation is brought to you by the number 1100. We like 42 and 3.14, but our number today is 1100. Does anybody have any guesses what that number represents?
Except
not
for Anand.
you.
Except for Anand, he knows
Anand's
what
not
it
allowed
means.
to talk.
Nope.
No, it's even better than that.
That is the number of deploys we did during the month of December, and we only had what?
That was we would have had some. No, I don't even know if Pi was there yet.
No, we probably only had maybe
That was SSO and support.
SSO support and a few HTML apps. So 1,100 production deploys in a month. Yep.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
for production, people, right? It just
That was all button
Yeah.
pushes
Yeah. Exactly.
for the most part. You remember that Garmin way? You
Yeah.
remember the Garmin way.
Yeah.
Sometimes the button push is still required.
That's right. That's right. So the other thing to say here is Cloud Foundry is an amazing tool. Pipelines are amazing. Spring is amazing. But when you put them all together, you get magic.
How many apps was that? 1,100. How many different apps?
We think maybe 3 or 4. Yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't very many because we literally were doing multiple production deploys an hour, right? It was like whoop-de-doo, let's go again. It's broken, let's fix it.
Yeah. And when going to production is a non-event, I mean, when it's not a painful thing to do, it's easy to do as many times as you want.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. Our director challenged us, I think, earlier this week, I think, in one of his presentations. He wants idea in the morning, production in the afternoon.
On your pipeline, are you guys doing in your Jenkins file or your automation, are you handling the blue-green, the zero downtime stuff, or do you have a plugin that you're using?
We essentially deploy to prod, and we don't make it active, right? We have it active on an internal address only, so people can go out and try it. And then when people are ready to go, then we turn it active. So it's not what I call a true blue-green deploy, more of a canary deploy almost than a blue-green, because blue-green would imply you have both of them taking traffic at the same time. We're not doing that yet.
Yeah. We do, but for a very short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, the goal would be to get to the ability to do blue-green deploys and actually route traffic percentage-wise based on some metric, right? Say I want to take 10% of the traffic and hit this one, and the rest of the 90% stay in production. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's just that we haven't automated that yet. So at the moment, we're sticking with zero downtime deploys. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. So we gave a talk at Cloud Foundry Summit in 2015, and this was one of the slides I used in the presentation there. And I followed it up with another slide of what a giant cluster it would have been had we just allowed anybody to come onto Cloud Foundry without having any gates in place. And we do have gates in place now, but as it turns out, this really is true. We have Connect is in the room. They've come to join us. We've got marketing apps. A lot of groups in the company are either interested or are already deploying to Cloud Foundry in some form of another. So it's been a really successful thing here, and we've got groups that now refuse to deploy any other way. When they talk about bringing in new applications or developing new stuff, they immediately assume this is where it's going to go.
For developers, it's an addiction.
Yeah, it is kind of an addiction. Sure you could.
It's kind of interesting. I'd say we probably have 20 to 30 micro apps, microservices, and maybe 15 to 20 straight HTML apps that are right now deploying to Cloud Foundry all the way to production. So, and people clamoring to to come do it. Now, how do I get into this? How do I do that? And
Yeah.
of course, we're more than happy to share with them how they can get there.
Mm-hmm. One of we acquired a company recently, and don't know that details are allowed to be public yet, but we're allowed to say we acquired them, right? So, what's that? So the group that's taking over the support of the application, this is just where it's going to live. There's no question. They're not even considering going to VMs with it. So, I thought that was pretty neat that they just came to me and said, "Hey, we need some new routes to host this thing, and we want to go."
So any greenfield app you build, is it truly cloud native?
Yes.
Try to go as small factor as you can.
Absolutely.
How small factor do you usually get with your apps?
11.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit on one of the other slides. But yeah,
Passwords, authenticating passwords, you see not enough to figure out a way to do that.
Because I've never seen a customer go fully 12 factor, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, it is hard. It is hard. So I think this is a good segue into our next slide.
yeah, it really comes down to if you're going to do cloud native, you really do need to do 12-factor. Obviously, that for us revolved around a few things. We used to have a lot of config files that were on secure directories because they contained passwords. So we had to figure out how to get those config files off the file system. First, we started with what I would consider to be an application-specific configuration file in config server. We soon realized that if we were pushing code as fast as we needed to, we really didn't need that extra config file sitting in config server. We just might as well have that application config live with the application, because if we're going to change it, we just repush the application. It's just as fast. So our config server has really become almost an address book lookup for other services. Because we don't really have a service registry right now, but we're not dependent on the file system, so that's a good thing. Logging is the next big thing, right? Obviously, everybody's used to logging to the file system. Pretty much, we had to convert everybody so that they're now logging with JSON logging instead of with straight to the file system. Otherwise, your stack traces end up being all over the place, and you can't see where things are. But that's essentially logging directly into Cloud Foundry, and it's using our log stuff going right into Kibana, and I can just see my logs there. So,
I think it's worth repeating what you said about configuration too. We push apps so fast, there's no point to taking configuration files and moving them off the application anymore, which is kind of interesting because it's full circle from where we were.
That's completely different than where we used to be, right? You
Yeah.
you had special code just so you could drop a new config file on, so you didn't have to redeploy the code because, well, that was a pain in the butt, right? So you dropped a config file on to make changes so that you could expose new behavior in the app. Well, we don't do that anymore. Why? That's kind of silly because we can just push rapidly and get it going. The big thing on cloud native, though, really has been developer education. I had a guy come to me, probably was it last week, I can't remember if it was last week or this week, came to me and he was like, I've got this application and I've got this database config in Tomcat, and I want to move this application into Cloud Foundry, and I've got this data source configured in Tomcat. And I'm like, well, you're using JNDI, right? Yeah. I said, well, you can't do that in Cloud Foundry. Or I don't want you to do that. And you might be able to do it, but I don't want you to do it in Cloud Foundry. That's not how we do things in Cloud Native Way. Cloud Native Way would say bind that as a service and figure out how to get your database that way, not go look it up at JNDI. And he's like, oh. I said, yeah, you really kind of need to go look at 12factor.net and make sure that your application is 12factor.net before you even think about coming into Cloud Foundry. And so essentially, he wasn't ready to move to Cloud Foundry. His application wasn't 12-factor, so he was premature in asking the question. But it's one of those things now. It's not really it's a gate, and we're not forcing people necessarily to be cloud native, but their app's not going to work if they're not cloud native in Cloud Foundry.
Mm-hmm. And part of it, I don't know that we necessarily require a pipeline, but we push really, really, really hard. If you're going to go 12-factor and if you want to be in Cloud Foundry, you need to have a pipeline.
If they ask me, I'm going to tell them they have to have a pipeline. But
I am too.
But that's because pipelines are mine, and I'm not going to let them do it without a pipeline. So
that makes no sense.
Well, and today, the way I do it with my library, they literally copy a Jenkins file, modify some config that's a JSON config that puts their names for their application in there. So really, at some point, that will be automated too, and they'll just generate their JSON file, and it just runs. So, I mean, Connect came in, and we had them up running on a pipeline in minutes. It really wasn't that long. So,
yeah.
And that was the very first iteration of that particular pipeline, and they just started using it, which was kind of nice. So,
I think it might be worth mentioning we have this app called GNAP, which one of the gentlemen in the room helped write, and I think one of the next things we want to do at our hackathon is mix GNAP up with Cloud Foundry so that you click your button, you fill out a little form that says, this is my app name and my package structure and all that stuff, and after that's done, you not only have an app that's running, it's building, it has a pipeline, and your dev Cloud Foundry is already up and going. That's, I think, probably where we're going to head next.
We'll be there.
Oh, yeah.
If I ever get a chance to work. I didn't go to work. So.
I jumped ahead a little bit there.
All right, so where are we going? Right now, we have somewhat an opinionated build pipeline. We're going to continue making that opinionated. I mean, Spring's kind of got the right answer from that perspective. Make things opinionated. If you want to go outside the opinionated, make it possible. I'm doing the same thing with my build pipelines. I'm making it opinionated. You can go outside my opinionated pipeline if you want. I'm probably not going to support you as much if you're using my opinionated pipeline, because I know it works. So use the one that works. If you want to go off on your own, you're more than welcome, but you're kind of on your own at that point. Right now we have an internal tool that we call RX3 that is an automated configuration for our HA proxy, so that we can now do routing outside of Cloud Foundry, for lack of a better term. So, our Cloud Foundry is not sitting on a public IP, so we have to be able to get the outside traffic to it. And this is an automated system. I literally can push a JSON config file in, and magic happens. And it rewrites the HA proxy config, and I get a route all the way from outside all the way to my Cloud Foundry app. And the developer didn't have to open a ticket, and didn't have to do firewall rule, and didn't have to do an F5 change. None of that. It's just there.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of our pipeline as well. So as you're deploying your app to each environment, you push the RX3 config with the push. And so the app comes up in Cloud Foundry, the route comes up, and you're good to go.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were. Obviously, we need to be more highly automated. So we need to have this automated acceptance testing and automated rollbacks, and we'll get there. I just will have to keep beating on people to get that happening, but we'll get there. We have some release engineers. I don't know whether you would call them release engineers anymore, because I don't do a lot of that, but we're going to be transitioning them out of that role because we won't need them anymore. I mean, they're still going to be doing it for a while because we have VMs that we still have to support for quite some time, but their jobs are becoming different. And actually, some of them actually want to start coding, and we're more than happy. Let's let them code and move into a developer role, because we always need more developers. So,
yep.
Last but not least, we actually built our own lab. And we don't mean Garmin labs. No. We're starting Drew's been in it for a week, but I would call it an opinionated development approach that Cloud Foundry allows us to do. We're really going to concentrate on test-driven development, pair programming, automated pipelines, and the whole goal of this lab is to fail fast, to get developers into this world where they're doing things maybe a different way than they're used to doing it. They're no longer sitting at their desk and going down a rabbit hole trying to solve some code problem. They're sitting next to a pair and they're figuring things out. Obviously, it's based quite a bit on the way Pivotal does their labs, but it's also the Garmin way because we never do anything not the Garmin way. The key is that it's experimental. We do expect to push to production in this lab. We expect the applications to go all the way to production. Obviously, Cloud Foundry allows that, but it's okay if they fail. We're just going to time box those things so that if we fail, we're not spending weeks failing. We're maybe a couple hours. Task in the lab, we're trying to get them down so you finish a task in half a day, or a whole day if it's a big task. Really, it's going to allow us to try to start turning that development culture that I would say we have a problem with here, and start getting developers to be more responsible for their own stuff. And this allows us to try new things all the time, and we're pretty excited about it. Jonathan and I are going to be what you would call mentors or coaches in the lab, along with one of the other architects named Bobby Hubbard. The goal would be to bring in a team for 4 to 6 weeks and just start trying things. Do pair programming, do test-driven development. If something works, great. If it doesn't work, try something else. We're not forcing teams once they leave the lab to use the tools that we've taught them in the lab. We're kind of trying to throw it at the wall and see what sticks approach. So once they leave the lab, if they want to keep pairing, great. They can keep pairing. If they want to keep doing TDD, great. They can keep doing TDD. But if they don't want to, if they find it's not beneficial to them, which we really don't think that's going to be the case, but if they find that it's not beneficial to them, they don't have to do what the lab does. They can do whatever's best for that team. We're just trying to use this to kind of jumpstart our change in development culture. So we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, it's been pretty successful so far. If you have any comments, you're welcome to make them too, but the groups that we've had in, I think, have really enjoyed it. I think the one challenge I've noticed is the folks that are truly introverted. We've got a couple people in IT that they love their headphones and they love to be heads down, and I think they found it a bit challenging to be in the lab, but none of them really hated it. I don't know that they'd come back if they were given the choice, but we haven't had a lot of real negative, like this was awful, I'll never do it again type comments, so that was...
for me, pairing is a challenge. I go in there, and I'm kind of the guy that likes to just go figure it out on my own. So having somebody sitting next to me trying to help me figure it out is not exactly the easiest thing in the world for me to do. But I did learn something pairing. I've learned how to do things differently because they might do a different shortcut or a different. They jump to the conclusion a little bit quicker than I do. So I would find that it can be challenging, but I'm willing to give it a try. So.
So when you're using test-driven development, I'm assuming you're creating some test cases, using some testing tools. What are you guys using currently for testing?
We use a lot of JUnit.
JUnit testing?
Yep. Yeah, with mocks and things like that. I think...
We have some of the front-end stuff being obviously running using Seleniums for some of that, but for the front end. But, yeah, I've obviously been looking at stuff too to see whether we can do some kind of some more what I would call integration testing with our services, but nothing yet really.
So you're not at the point where you're just making sure that once it passes the unit test, how do you know to move into the next level pipeline? It should be truly automated, and you have to go ahead and pass the unit test. You have to pass some type of system integration test.
Well, today we're not in the world where we have any of those system integration tests automated or any of the acceptance tests automated. So today you pass the unit test and you move to the next environment, and then you wait for somebody to actually validate that the code is actually working the way it is. So even with that wait step, we've gotten a lot faster with our development because, getting to that environment used to take forever. Well, now it's there literally that day. So we're faster. We're still not where we want to be. Obviously, we'd much prefer to have integration tests and acceptance tests automated so that we could fail faster even.
Yeah.
So when I used to work at DST, that's where I came from.
He said sorry.
I'm no longer. We used to spend a lot of time building the automation testing, and not just the environment, but just the amount of testers.
Yeah, we've been in a world here for quite some time where the QA team is pretty separate from the development team. We've had that almost a hard line separation. It used to be, throw it over the wall. We're going to try to break down that wall with this lab and try to bring QA in as a first-class citizen, for lack of a better term, so that they help own those tests at the beginning, and the developer and them can work together on what that testing looks like from an integration perspective.
Point where the skills of being a QA person start to market.
Yeah.
So you're no longer doing manual tests. Simply imagine like you would now be doing a Selenium test.
Right.
From the front end, and who's going to sit down and throw some REST calls to some type of microservice in the background. You really want that to do that automated. So it's all of a sudden you have to be changing the skills of those QA test folks.
Yeah, but but there's also still the need for some of that, what I would call exploratory testing, that the QA people potentially are good at. So you're never going to completely lose the QA role. They're just not going to be as many of them, right? Some of those will be developers, and some of them will be QA people.
Yeah.
Typical in some of the labs that, we don't have people as a normal part of the team, because they're doing all the testing, as a part of the developers are bringing it. We still have people that will kind of come in and do some of the Uber tests on top that, much more thought required to do those. So.
Yeah.
The QA team can always pull out test cases, the perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody actually ends up writing the test cases.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd actually like to see it where we had QA people who were given a certain amount of time every day to just go try and break it. Like, not even like, hey, these are all our unit tests, these are all passing, or sorry, not unit, but integration. All this stuff's passing, the app's in production, we know it's working. Go be a dumb guy and see if you can make, say you want to pay $1 million for one of our products and see if that works, or, do whatever.
I'll volunteer to be the dumb guy. I'm pretty good, I'm pretty good
There
at
you
that.
go. Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, if compliance is another factor that you have to have with QA team to come in and do acceptance testing and things like that, just to meet some compliance requirements, right?
Well, we don't really, we wouldn't have any regulatory reasons for that for most of the stuff we're working on. Most of that stuff would be in aviation, where we're not developing that. But from a audit and a compliance perspective, from a SDLC, we did have to rewrite our narrative to allow us to essentially, we used to have a requirement for peer code review, and so pair programming didn't allow, it was, that code review, the way it was written, didn't allow for pair programming, because pair programming is a peer code review. It's just happening as the time of the development. So we had to rewrite our narrative, and we will probably continue to do that to make sure that we're essentially following some kind of control. But I want those controls to be as little as possible. I want the developer to be responsible for it all the way to production, and I don't want them dependent on some control to protect them from making a mistake. I want them to be responsible for it. So we'll see. Yeah, there's still some gray area there that we have to worry about, but we're looking at that closely.
I think it's interesting to note, too, that SOX doesn't say this is how you should develop. SOX says you have to have controls. So you can rewrite your controls, and we did. Yeah, we had to.
Yes?
Can I add on to that?
Yeah.
You can add whatever you want.
So we have a team that traditionally ERP, PLC developers, and one of the success stories I wanted to share is that in the last couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, they created more than 10 microservices with probably the name not the same quality as the other Java developer would have done it, but with the same speed. I think a lot to say for PCF, Spring, and probably
Yeah, it was.
Everybody has to focus on what they have to do, everything else is just.
It was kind of interesting. I probably got 15 code reviews that I had to look at in like a couple weeks' time for all these new microservices, because they all wanted me to look at their pipelines, make sure their pipelines were working, and they were.
And they're so thrilled, so excited to do
Yeah, and the business is pretty appreciative too, because now the functionalities out there are a lot quicker than what it would have been before. So
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to say on testing that with regular applications it would be pretty difficult is if you want to use production as your test bed, Cloud Foundry would allow you to do something like that, where you could say, hey, I have this the gold version of my application. It's taking 99% of my traffic, and its error rate is X. Now I take 1% and I put it on this candidate release. And if the error rate is the same or lower, that becomes the gold release. So in a state where you don't have enough testing to truly cover your application, you can kind of use Cloud Foundry to push the envelope a little bit, because routing is such a mundane, simple thing to do. You can route to something that maybe isn't quite ready for production to figure out if it really is ready. And if it's not, the rollback is so unbelievably fast that your customers aren't really going to notice there's a problem.
You know, the thing there is you have to have that feedback.
yeah, the
You
feedback.
do.
The test.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've got an error, and you to be able to say, okay, I know what percentage of it.
And I would say
Right.
that's probably our weakest point right now from
Yeah.
that perspective, is that feedback loop is really manual at this point, and obviously we'd prefer it to be much more automated from a feedback loop perspective. But it is,
I understand you can cut back on your test-driven development.
yeah.
Oh, we. Yeah. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that if you have an app that's reasonably well tested, you could use production as your final test and truly do a canary deploy. And I think our real challenges there aren't the fact that we can or cannot do that. The challenge is getting our automation up to speed so that we can get to the point where this is a legitimate approach that we have scripted. We're listening to the right things. We know what's going to happen. We know how this is going to work, and we know what we're going to do if it fails.
Yeah,
That's,
we
I
have,
think,
we
our
have big
issue.
dreams, right? Big dreams.
It's a good approach. I mean, as long as you have, you have a sample that you can throw to your,
Right.
your canary in the coal mine, like
Yep.
dropping it, give it a try.
Yeah. Well, Cloud Foundry is awesome at that. I mean, it's very simple to route that way, either using Cloud Foundry or routing tools on top of it. So, yeah.
So are you guys versioning any of your services, or is everything always version 1?
We are not truly doing a release and versioning. What we are doing is we are just pushing the next build to production. There's still some argument on the team about whether we should version or not. My argument is we're never going to go back to it. We're just going to fix and go forward, so why do I need the version? Unless I have some kind of a regulatory reason to keep the version, then I might version it. But for the most part, I'm just going to fix and move forward, so I don't really need the version, so why waste the time building it?
Without the A/B testing?
I think it's like the version of the application.
Well, from a version of the application perspective, right, I'll have 2 out there at any one time, right? And if
Well,
it,
I'm assuming what you're trying to get to is I want to be able to fully recreate the one that's taking 99% of the.
well, we keep the oldest, we keep 2 out there, we keep 1 running and 1 not running, for the most part, from a production perspective. So if we needed to, we could shut down the newest one and go back to the old one just by restarting it. So just by switching the route.
You can't recreate those from a version control system.
Nope.
That's where the.
Nope. No, I do not recreate them from a version control system at all.
No.
Because if it's broken, I'm just going to fix the code and push another release. It certainly is.
Right.
It's we used to do this, huge, like we'd have a develop branch and everybody create feature branch off the develop branch, and we'd check into feature branch, and then we'd have to create a release branch, and then we pull from develop into release, and we got somebody didn't merge in correctly, so now I got to cherry pick, and then I finally get to master. Well, I don't do that anymore. I'm like, just go to master directly, check into master, and deploy. And if your code's not production ready, it better not be in master.
So, going back to your scenario, wouldn't it be nice to be able to know, hey, obviously I've got this canary in the coal mine, which is taking the 1%.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to at least know the difference between the one that I really have in production and.
Oh, that's easy. Yeah, you've got commit hashes.
You're able to at least identify what's the difference.
Sure, we know
Right.
the difference.
So that you can at least be able to go back and be able to roll back.
Yeah. Yeah, Jenkins, every time it builds, Jenkins itself will tell you what commit hash it used to build from, so you can see the next one. Yeah, but I think the point James was trying to make is at the point where we are now, it's it's more cumbersome to go to Nexus and pull down an artifact and deploy it than it is to just go fix a problem and redeploy.
Yeah, it's another mindset change that's kind of scary for some people, right? And what do you mean I can't get back to that? Well, do you really? How often do you really go back to it?
So for some of the developers care, right? But
Yeah.
more people are adapting to it and accepting it.
In the 7 years I've been at Garmin, I don't think I've ever, well, maybe early on when we were doing those monthly releases, I might have gone back to a previous release to deploy it. But in the last 2 or 3 years, nope, never go back to it. Just build
Right.
another one.
Yeah, when you're agile with a pipeline, whether you're doing a small tweak or a fix, or the director is sitting beside you and he doesn't like the way that this picture is where it is on the screen, all those things take the same amount of time, whether you're fixing something or enhancing something. So at that point, it's like I'm just going to keep moving forward.
Well, that's all we got.
Yeah.
So that's our journey. That's where we're at, where we're going. Got a lot more ahead of us, and it's going to be exciting and fun. But thanks for coming.
Thank you. Yeah.